Hi, I'm Suhasini Haider. I'm the national and diplomatic editor at the Hindu newspaper. And I've been invited today by Carnegie India to talk about what I see as the future of the world post-pandemic. What is the coronavirus impact on geopolitics going to be? And how we see India's place in the world changing in the next few months, if not years. To begin with, I'd like to say, the coronavirus has forced a pause. It's a forced pause for a world that was on steroids. And because it was a forced pause, something that we weren't expecting and something that we didn't really look out for, it's given us some time. It's given us this pause, as I said, in order to ask the questions about what is the kind of world that we have built here. It's also forcing us to confront questions that we have only paid lip service to so far, in a sense, things like climate change, things like global warming, things like water shortages, things that we didn't really think we'd have to deal with immediately. There were future challenges always for us. And I think that the pause that has been forced by the coronavirus, regardless of how long or short we have to, a period we have to face before we see a cure or a vaccine, is how we can work harder to bridge the various gaps and bridge the various divides in the world that have really come to the fore in the last few weeks. This is not just geopolitical divides, the big rivalries in the world. It's also about the digital divide, how it's divided people who have access to digital technology, who have access to food, security, clean water, access to medicines and healthcare, and those who don't. Finally, I think this coronavirus pandemic is really going to change global leadership. What is the meaning of global leadership, and who are really leading the world when it comes to its recovery from the coronavirus? And I'm going to speak about each one of those. So at the broadest level, if you were to ask me, I would say that global themes will face a rethink. They will face a reassessment of sorts. The spread of the epidemic, to begin with, from Wuhan, which saw maybe the first cases in November, the end of October, November, to the rest of the world, and then the rapid fire increase in the number of cases, particularly in countries like Iran, like Italy, like the US, have raised questions, very fundamental questions about globalization and the global supply chain. These are going to be reworked. If it is so easy for a pandemic to move between one country and another simply because they are connected by flights and by travelers between the two, then is all that connectivity that we once took such pride in actually part of a larger problem? So this is something that is going to be asked again and again. We've seen nationalistic instincts of many governments come out saying my country first, or saying we would like to shut off our trade connections or other connections with other countries. Certainly it is true that for an epidemic that has seen no regions, no borders, it has crossed across the world, we are actually seeing a world that is shrinking behind those borders and shrinking inside their country. So is this neo-nationalism, in fact, going to become a trend to stay, or are we going to have to try and work out more global cooperation? There are also the questions about, as I said, the ones that we had paid only lip service to so far, on global warming, on climate change mitigation, what our efforts so far have achieved. Because remember, the epidemic itself, the idea that the Wuhan virus came from a bat that went maybe to a pangolin or some kind of mammal before crossing over to humans, is as much about the man-animal interface and the growing man-animal conflict, if you like, as they fight for the same spaces, as forest shrinks. That is something that becomes a place where more epidemics like this could actually challenge the world. We're also seeing the other side, which is what the lockdowns in so many parts of the world have achieved for the environment. We need to really think right now about what we are going to do, because the lockdowns will be lifted. There is only so long the world economy can face them. We need to think right now, while we are in the phase of lockdowns, exactly how we are going to ensure that we keep this cleanliness when it comes to the air, when it comes to the water, when it comes to the fact that we are able to see more and more animals or birds come out freely. What are we going to do to sustain, in a sense, this revived environment? Next, we come to the questions of sustainability. Some of the most heart-rending pictures that have come from this epidemic are about, of course, the people who have died, the health issues and facilities that were unavailable for people. But also the immense suffering that has been seen by the poor, by the vulnerable in countries across the world, not because they have faced the pandemic, but because of the lockdowns and what was needed to counter the pandemic. So these are the countries that we will have to look at very closely and ask which are most sustainable when it comes to healthcare. Is it that the richest countries in the world prevailed quicker over the pandemic? Or is it that some of the poorer countries in the world, countries like Cuba, there are other countries, including in the Indian subcontinent, where we are seeing hospitals so far being able to manage and to be able to cope with what they've seen. And similarly, the access to cheap medicine, how India has, in a sense, become almost the compounder to the world, the pharmacy to the world, in terms of sending out basic things like malarial drugs, hydroxychloroquine, or paracetamol. Now, these are drugs that are used for many things, and it's not yet clear what their role in fighting the coronavirus is or in curing it. But certainly it has thrown up that idea that it's not necessarily the richest countries or the countries with the biggest economies or the first world countries that we've always looked to that have come out at the forefront when it comes to sustainability. In the short term, as I keep saying, we will concentrate on the small SDGs, what are called social distancing goals these days. But in the long term, we will have to come back to those questions of the global SDGs, the sustainability development goals, and try to marry all the advances we have made in technology, in artificial intelligence, in biotechnology, space engineering, to do basic things, to provide basic water, shelter, food, as well as healthcare to the world's most vulnerable. Because what this epidemic has proven is that if one person has it, the whole world can have it. It won't matter what country, creed, religion, economic bracket, or anything else that person comes from. The US-China rivalry is likely to speed up, and much faster than we have seen it speed up in the last few years. We are going to see the economic rivalry that played out between them also come into play when it comes to fighting for all the issues we were just talking about, when it comes to the rivalry over finding a cure or finding a vaccine or access to PPE, protective equipment for doctors. There's already a lot playing out. There's a huge blame game in the world, and certainly China, as the place where the virus was first noticed in Wuhan, has a lot to answer when it comes to how quickly they announced this virus to the world, how quickly they shut down the possibility of this virus to spread to other parts of the world. And even today, how much is China sharing when it comes to the science and the research they have been able to do about this virus? But there are questions that the US will also have to answer. And the US has been part of this kind of unspoken bio-warfare that the world is seeing. So it's also a question of how much everybody knew. We know, for example, that right at the beginning of when this was known in January, the drug, the antiviral drug, remdesivir, which is now being seen as a possible cure, was something both US and China entities put their names to try and patent. Clearly, there was science ahead of everything else that perhaps is not known in the international sphere. So we are going to see this US-China rivalry grow. We're going to see it grow in the economic sphere for sure, where we're already seeing high levels of back and forth, but also spilling into the military sphere, and the US's new push for the Indo-Pacific will definitely be a part of some sort of confrontation when it comes to the military sphere. The second, so the US-China rivalry is one geopolitical theme. I think the second is definitely going to be the bipolar versus the multipolar. Is the world going to sit back and just let two poles or two rivals fight each other and then decide whether to take sides? Or is the rest of the world, in a sense, going to look to the multipolar world order? Here I mean much more regional outfits, special purpose alliances, trade alliances, technological alliances that must be made immune to the sort of ups and downs of the relationship between the two big powers. In India, for example, we have seen the SAARC alliance come alive once again. So you have the US-China rivalry, the bipolar versus the multipolar, and finally you have whether the future is going to be taken forward by the United Nations, or will there be something new? Because remember, the United Nations came out of the post-World War II order. This was something people had talked about earlier, but had not really seen in the same way. And as a result, that first post-World War II order, with the UN Security Council at its helm, with those 5 permanent members, has held until 2020. But now we are seeing questions asked about the efficacy of the United Nations, the questions being asked about the WHO. This may not be the right time to ask those questions. This may not be the time to defund any of these efforts, but perhaps the questions over whether something new as a world forum is going to have to emerge will come after this. Finally, I'd like to also put out some ideas I have in terms of the sort of choices the world is going to face. Because remember, now that we've been a few weeks into the lockdown, we are also looking at new ways of doing work, the future of work right now, the future of energy, for example. We've seen the US future trades for oil crash to below minus $40. We are looking at a situation where West Asian countries that have depended on their oil revenues are going to be hit. As a result, so many countries that have people working there are going to be hit. The ripple effects will be seen across. Within that, we are going to have to ask some basic questions. And so if I can sit at home and bring this to you, am I not going to need physical connectivity anymore? So those questions are yet unanswered. We don't really know where this is going to go, but you might see a place where actually connectivity technology or communication technology is going to come up against physical connectivity. The second question is really going to be about whether we will allow artificial intelligence and robotics, because remember, robots and artificial intelligence don't worry about epidemics quite the same way as human beings do. So are we going to see a future where they replace much needed jobs for humans? And how you are going to ensure that productivity is fueled while you keep people employed. In a sense, this is an ethical question as well. How do societies want to employ their people? Are they going to have to find new skills for their people? Are they going to have to re-educate their people so that they still can earn a good living and improve their living? Or is it just going to be who can make the fastest, quickest buck? We are going to have to see a whole new world, as I said, of education, scaling up, working about, about bringing people more and more into and giving them access to more skills through perhaps this kind of scaling up of education through online processes, but also grapple with those who get left behind even further, those who are the have-nots of the digital divide. And finally, I think we really do need to think in terms of the interactions that we have always taken for granted, the people-to-people interactions, the leader to electorate interactions, the business leader to his management hierarchy interactions, and think about whether those are going to change. in a sense, there is a catch-22 over there as well, between having people work from home, having people cut off, in a sense, allowing systems where people are not necessarily interacting with each other, and what that does to the hierarchies. And finally, as a journalist, I do want to have to ask those questions about what this is going to mean for basic human rights. If a pandemic is able to create the kind of fear that we have seen coronavirus create, is it in a sense going to allow governments that would otherwise be questioned to slip through certain authoritarian controls over the public, who would not otherwise have accepted them? Are there going to be questions of privacy and surveillance that will get swept under the carpet as well? And in a sense, are we going to come out of the coronavirus pandemic with a commitment to build a better world than the one that we live in? I'll leave it over there. I do look forward to your emailing us with any questions you may have. I'm Suhasini Haidar, speaking to the Carnegie India team over here. Thanks for watching.